Now, in this edition of Battle of the Heroes and Villains, we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked you to grade Count Dooku, aka Darth Tyrannus. We'll then calculate a score based off those results, and compare him to all the other characters we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some comments. And speaking of other characters, you can already nominate which one we should do next. Again, what you need to do is simply reply to the pinned comment below with one name, and whatever single comment gets the most thumbs up will be the winner. And do take care to try not to nominate the same character twice, and potentially split votes because they won't be added together. Okay, all that said, let's get to the results, where we'll see that 20% of voters thought that Count Dooku was an A tier character, 55% then said B, 21% C, which left 3% to give him a D, and a final 2% to give him an F. And when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, as well as remove a percentage point from C because this added up to 101%, and that's due to the way things get rounded off. Anyway, we end up with an overall score of 3.88. And that currently puts him into, well, last place overall, though it's not a position he'll stay in for long when we consider that the 6 above him are some of the most popular and most explored characters in the whole franchise. And so what I think these results tend to say, especially considering 55% of people voted B, is that he's kind of one of the best of the rest, which isn't meant as a slight, but instead is meant to say he's one of the better or more liked characters that's never really been heavily explored or focused on, outside of a couple books which, if we're being honest, most fans have never read. Alright then, let's now move on to the comments, and as always, a big thank you to everyone who votes, comments, nominates, and so on. Anyway, we'll start as usual with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Steamy Linguini, who said, "I think if he had been on the council in The Phantom Menace, his character would have been 10 times better." We also had this comment from Adriac Starks, who said, "Christopher Lee did such an awesome job creating a mysterious, gentlemanly yet imposing villain, and he was a real fresh twist from the stoic, humorless Darth Vader and the maniacally evil, twisted Palpatine. The only thing missing for me, and the reason why I only gave him a B, is that he wasn't at all set up in The Phantom Menace. If you believe the Darth Jar Jar theory, you know why. All they really needed was to include a scene or two of him sitting on the Jedi Council, and maybe talking to Qui-Gon. It would have also really helped Attack of the Clones' detective flick angle, as knowing who Dooku was going into that movie would have made it a bit less obvious that the Separatists were the bad guys, rather than introducing him solely as the leader of the Separatist movement and merely alluding to his time as a Jedi Master." And you know, one little scene like that in The Phantom Menace probably could have done a lot for Dooku's character. Perhaps before bringing Anakin before the Council, we get a quick scene where Qui-Gon and Dooku discuss the prophecy or something along those lines, and how Dooku doesn't think the other Jedi will believe him, that they won't see the will of the Force even if it's literally brought before them. And then during the meeting when the other Jedi are skeptical of Anakin, Qui-Gon can look at Dooku briefly, who just sort of shrugs as if to say, "I told you so." You could then have Yoda glance over at Dooku as if he senses something going on there with his former Padawan, which would set up the eventual battle and Attack of the Clones between them a little bit better. And yes, I do realize it's easier to come up with things like this in hindsight than it is to have the foresight to plan ahead this intricately. Though it would have been really cool just to see Dooku sitting in on the council meeting, even if he never said a word and just sat there. Or even if there was an empty chair that eventually could be implied Dooku had recently left the Order. And in the new canon, Dooku does leave the Order before the events of The Phantom Menace. And speaking of that, we come to this comment now from Hammond Dio, who said, "For everyone who wants more backstory, consider reading Dooku, Jedi Lost. It's a really good script style story, and it goes into a lot of detail about Dooku, Ventress, and a bit of Sifo Dyas." And I'll also add to this that there is another book called Master and Apprentice, which focuses more on Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, but does also include some snippets of Qui-Gon's time as Dooku's Padawan, which are really good. In fact, they're both really good, and I do recommend them, and I won't go more into these stories here in case someone does want to actually read them, and you don't want spoilers. Okay, next up here we have this comment from Media Dunce, who said, "C. After the death of Darth Maul, Star Wars had to come up with some villain for the Jedi to fight, and they came up with Dooku. He did have some depth in Attack of the Clones, but was killed too early in Revenge of the Sith for me to give him a higher score. In the Clone Wars, though intimidating, his whole demeanor was, I'm the bad guy. Also, he was captured by pirates in the first season. We also here have this comment from Alpha Beta 17, who said, while Christopher Lee's portrayal was great, he never got a lot of depth, with the backstory only really being hinted at. Even the Clone Wars show didn't really delve into him or why he left the Jedi Order, and he was relegated to the big bad guy that leads the enemy army. It's a pity. All the characters around him, like Ventress and Savage Opress, were all really well done. Not a bad character, but not great. Low B. We also then had this comment from Jonathan Ryan, who said, he basically appeared out of nowhere as a Darth Maul replacement and revealed he was the missing link between Yoda and Qui-gon, then dies really early one film later. But he was also Christopher Lee, did as much of his own duels as possible despite his age, and the Clone Wars really did his character the justice he deserved. Movies is kind of a D plot, while B acting despite his cheesy lines and Lucas's directing. In the Clone Wars, his character was a solid A, and basically everything Lucas likely envisioned but failed to convey in his short screen time in the prequels. And yeah, I can see how some might feel like he kind of comes out of nowhere after Maul is killed in The Phantom Menace, though I do think Lucas tries to give us a worthy explanation for him and attempts to make him a natural part of the story. Unfortunately though, he's only in the back half of Attack of the Clones, and he dies in the opening sequence basically of Revenge of the Sith, which was pretty necessary to set up Anakin replacing him. So all in all, I'd say Dooku is an adequate character in the prequels, one who does his job and does it well, and is played by a legendary actor, which of course helps, but that's about all in terms of the films. Which then kind of brings us to this comment from Blue Shadow X, who said, don't really find him interesting in the movies as Palpatine's temporary apprentice between Maul and Vader, but once again Clone Wars helps elevate an average part of the prequels. He gets a solid B from me. We also had this comment from Innerin Commander, who said, Dooku gets a B from me. Oddly enough, he's one of the few characters I like less with the addition of the Clone Wars, whereas in the movies he seems like he was only evil because he was controlled by Palpatine, which in reality everyone was. In the show he came off as pure evil, basically a less intimidating or awesome version of Palpatine. Part of his greatness in the movies was the kind of honorable villain air, and the other part is probably the excellent acting of the late and great Sir Christopher Lee. We also then had this comment from Stuart Moran, who said, he's an interesting character, but I just kind of feel like he didn't get enough attention in the Clone Wars or the movies. You know, when it comes to Dooku in the Clone Wars, I hear, and certainly read this week in the comments, a lot of different opinions. Some love him in the Clone Wars and think it greatly enhances his character. Others don't think it really did much either way, and others still say it very much contradicts with how he was in the movies, that in the films he doesn't really seem to be evil, he's more of a reluctant villain, or is controlled by Palpatine, or is the Thanos type who is absolutely convinced himself he's doing the right thing and the only thing he can do. I've always loved in Attack of the Clones after he deals with Obi-Wan and Anakin. He sort of sighs and looks almost a bit distraught, not so much because he's regretting everything, but because it's now coming down to this, which he knew it would, but it's turning out to be harder than he thought it would. And though I certainly think you could make a case that he loses some of that in the Clone Wars, that he seems more evil for the sake of being evil than the good guy who maybe lost his way and is doing what he thinks is right, I've always looked at it as this is just what happens when you deal with the dark side. You lose yourself to it and your real or original goal is lost as well. Somewhere, though he started with the best of intentions, Dooku lost himself to the dark side. And when he gets killed by Anakin, that look on his face after Palpatine tells Anakin to kill him now, it says so much. And one of the things it says is, I lost myself and I got played. Alright, next up here we have this comment from Robert Bush, who says, he deserves an A for sure. Everything about his story is perfect. I love how he is kind of a mix of both Sith and Jedi. He upholds the Sith teachings but still fights with honor and respect for his opponents, which really sets him apart from other villains in Star Wars, because at the end of the day, he's a good man fighting for a lost cause. We also then had this comment from Grape89, who said, C in the movies, high A in the Clone Wars. I loved how he showed that not all Sith are pure evil. He even showed to a more general audience that Jedi and Sith can work together, where Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Dooku escape from Hondo. Solid B character. I mean, I kind of agree and disagree with this. I could certainly be wrong here, but I always thought Dooku saw becoming a Sith as more of a means to an end than anything else. And as I just got done saying a moment ago, the dark side doesn't work that way. It corrupts, absolutely. And anyone who thinks they can gain control over it will soon become a pawn or puppet of it, and likely never even realize it, or realize it way too late. And that's part of what I think Yoda meant when he told Luke in The Empire Strikes Back that once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, consume you it will. In other words, like Dooku, I don't think too many people make the conscious choice to become a Sith. I don't think it's really their goal, or any type of dark sider making that conscious choice to become that way. It's just a matter of something that happens to them. And you think you can use it and you can control it for your own goal, and before you know it, your original goal just doesn't matter. And I think Dooku, and Anakin too obviously, are perfect examples of this. Okay, let's now move on to this comment from Torna Dragon, who said, he would be an A if his Legends backstory was clearer in the movies. It's really cool that Anakin and Dooku are supposed to be foils, the best and worst of the Jedi in their respective times, as well as Dooku being Qui-Gon's master, adds sort of a adopted family dynamic. Except, watching the films, none of this you'd get, none of that character. We also had this comment from Patrice Perry, who said, I think he was very close to an A, but Clone Wars cannot carry his character. At least he was played by Christopher Lee. And I think there's a very fine line between a character who is simply better or more fleshed out if you watch the shows, read the books, and so on, and a character that needs all that stuff to be a good character. And the thing to keep in mind is that not every character in a movie needs to be well developed just to fill a role. Some are just there to move the plot forward and hopefully be interesting in the few moments of screen time they get. I mean, I don't need to know Dexter Jettster's full backstory or to have him fully fleshed out for him to work in his one scene in Attack of the Clones. We get the impression he and Kenobi have been friends for a while, and he likely was in a shadier line of work before he opened up his little cafe, and that's that. He's also got a unique look and feel to him, a personality that quickly comes across, and thus he works and works well. And so the tricky thing with a character like Dooku is he's not the main antagonist of the whole trilogy, and he's barely the main antagonist of this one movie thanks to kind of sharing that role with Jango Fett, and then there's also of course Sidious still lurking in the background. So the question or dilemma becomes, how much time do you spend developing this character when time spent on him is time taken away from another potentially more important character? Though the little development from him we do get in Attack of the Clones was dual purpose, since we learn it through interactions with Obi-Wan and then Yoda, and we kind of see how these characters all tie together. And so, going along with what I said before, I think Dooku serves his purpose well in Attack of the Clones, and even in Revenge of the Sith. We get the minimum we need for him to work, and that's it. And maybe one or two more scenes in the movies would have been nice to perhaps give him just a bit more depth. But I don't know how much more time you really wanted to spend on him, even if he is or seems to be a fascinating character, at which point I'm happy the other sources of canon have delved into him more. Okay, next up here we have this comment from Michael Chamura, who said, absolutely an A. Christopher Lee is a phenomenal actor and his performance is so good. Every time he delivers a line, I just can't help but smile. He is easily one of the most fun characters in Star Wars and commands the screen. And you're right, I mean, Christopher Lee had an on-screen presence maybe unlike any other actor before. His voice alone commands your attention and draws you in and just holds you there. I think one of the reasons some are disappointed with Dooku in the films is they just wanted more of this actor and the character he was playing, because they're just that intrigued. And though some of his lines, if done by any other actor in the world perhaps, would have likely sounded really cheesy, the way Christopher Lee delivers them makes them sound epic. Okay, let's now get to just a few more comments before wrapping this up, starting with this one from Dark Flame Pro, who said, classiest antagonist ever, always smiles, presents himself, doesn't boast after victory, your swords, please. Then this comment from Denzel O'Reilly, who said, the character has little to no importance in the story, but I love Count Dooku for the sole reason of Sir Christopher Lee's iconic performance. I mean, you just gotta love good, twice the pride, double the fall. We also have this comment from John Bambauer, who said, I loved him, and the more I watch the prequels, I appreciate his acting and how he portrayed Dooku. These movies left me wanting to know more about the mystery surrounding his turn to the dark side, and more about his life as a Jedi. Then this comment from Colby Moody, who said, "Hands down the most underrated Star Wars villain. He's cunning, classy, and has honestly a pretty tragic story." And finally, this comment here from Joe Bolton, who said, "He's honestly amazing when you read all his material." And again here on the big screen, Dooku I think was handled well enough and felt larger than life thanks mostly to Christopher Lee's amazing performance. And I think it's mostly the presence that makes people just want to know more about this character or feel like he was underused. And there is more out there, be it the Clone Wars, which yes, there's a debate to be had about how true that version of the character is to the one on film. And there's a lot of books and comics spread across the new canon and Legends, which goes further into the character's motivations and backstory. Either way, I think most will agree that he's a solid all-around character that was played by a legendary actor on screen. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about Count Dooku, or what I or anyone else had to say about him in this video. Either that or head down to the comments to nominate the character you'd like to see us do next, or give a thumbs up to the one that's already there that you'd like to see. Either way, do leave a comment below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.